Welcome to episode 328 of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about Xbox's upcoming hardware releases, PlayStation adding FSR4 to the PS5 Pro, the Switch 2's rumored price, and a whole bunch more. Before we get started, subscribe to the Baunfire Gaming Podcast on your favorite podcast app and leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, and subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and Twitch subscribers. If you're interested in supporting this show and my other content, please check out the links in the show description. You can now leave a comment on the Spotify episode, leave a comment on this YouTube video, or join my Discord to chat with others about all of this news and more. Struggling to get through this today. Let's jump into the gaming news. We're going to kick it off with reports are stating that an Asus gaming handheld with Xbox software, not made by Xbox. This isn't first party. It's more of a partnership, it sounds like. Is going to be slated to be coming out possibly this summer. This will run Xbox games natively through like the PC app. So this rumor is specifying that this won't be like the Xbox console software on hardware, which would mean that anything that's on the console would be on this, which is what everyone wants. This would instead essentially be an Asus handheld, like the ROG Ally, that would, it sounds like, have some native Xbox UI built into it, but it also sounds like it's going to have access to other platforms, but we'll get more into that. The idea is that this kind of partner hardware could come as soon as summer of 2025 and is expected to be $500 to $600. This was interesting because it will likely allow the access to like Steam and other things as well, other platforms. And again, this like rumor has so heavily pushed, like this is not the Xbox handheld that has been talked about. That from what I've seen isn't expected to come until after the next like console, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this handheld is a really good first step, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if this is kind of a test where it could be a test for Xbox to see how people interact with something that has some more like native software on it. That would obviously be useful to them because they want to see where they can improve things. This is almost a beta test for them, right? There's also a chance that whatever handheld they end up making will likely need to get contracted out to someone to make it. There's a pretty good chance that Asus or one of these other existing brands could do that. They could develop and produce it internally like they do with the Xbox, but maybe they won't. We'll have to wait and see. This and how this goes will likely be a big determiner of that. The other parts of this rumor that came at the same time were that the Xbox Series replacement, so the replacing of this Series X and S, is planned for 2027. And as I've reported before, production of this new console, hopefully it's just one this time, is already all the way go. So fairly recently we reported, and it was reported that they were out of the like pitch stage and that they were actively making this new console. Now that doesn't mean that there's a factory churning out new ones. What it means, I assume, from what I read and from what I know, it's very likely they basically have all the way up the chain, all the way up to Satya Nadella, have gotten the green light on whatever the specific idea is. So it probably means that hardware is locked down and ready, and they know what kind of CPU and GPU and all the memory and how they're going to do storage and all of that. Choices on other things, like the rumors that it could essentially be a Windows machine where you could, in theory, even have access to like GOG or Steam stores through this thing. I find that kind of unlikely, but we'll have to wait and see. That wouldn't hurt. It could be a good thing. I'm just curious to how like Steam would do, because I kind of suspect that Xbox won't put Steam on one of their consoles unless there's some kind of licensing deal where they get a cut of those sales. We'll have to wait and see. I still am. I still think that the boldest move would be to do something as soon as 2026, next year. I think, realistically and logistically, it makes more sense that 27 would be the thing. I suspect that we're going to see more and more, especially with all these other moves that Xbox is making. We're likely going to see them stop trying to continue in this generational rat race. I really think they're trying to get out of that. I think they're, trying to exit that whole conversation. And by releasing a console a couple years ahead, likely, of the PS6, they can do that to a point. The thing I'm looking out for is not only for them to get out early, but then to release new hardware fairly often. If they aren't counting on, selling up 50 million, 100 million consoles the way that Sony expects to, they can be more agile. If this becomes a more niche part of their platform, but that they still care about, if anything, it may end up being more successful, because as they have less pressure on it being the best or selling, 50, 100 million units, they'll likely be more creative and do things that are more interesting for a smaller niche customer base, even if it means it's going to be more, again, because they're not trying to sell more of them than a Nintendo Switch, right? They're just trying to provide an option for the people who want to play their games from their platform, right? Console is the best place for them to sell things. It's where they don't pay anyone else. There's no licensing or anything like that. But it kind of seems like they aren't super worried about that. And so far, it seems like it's working pretty well for them. So I'm curious how this plays out. The thing with the Asus handheld makes complete sense. The way that a lot of the people at Xbox have kind of danced around, every time Phil Spencer is on an interview, it's the same 10 questions with every podcast. And one of them is always talking about the handheld. And he obviously isn't going to reveal any giant new announcements on some podcast with a dude who kind of looks like me, but his neckline on his shirt is like pulled down to his tits. Like, I don't, it's, that's not where these announcements happen. They happen in June at the showcase. They happen on a special podcast or video or showcase. Maybe Jeff Keighley gets to, break his PlayStation ad deal and do something for Microsoft, as they did with the Series X. So I'm curious about this. I'm excited for it. I think a lot of the things they're doing are pretty smart. I guess I kind of understand why some fans are mad about it, but I think for the most part, people just like being mad about stuff and they don't really even understand why. Moving on to another story that we had this week, PlayStation announces that AMD's FSR4 kind of resolution and frame rate tool will be coming to the PlayStation 5 Pro in some capacity. So there was an interview, I believe it was Eurogamer, with Mark Cerny, who's the head of technology at Sony PlayStation. And they revealed that they're going to basically be backporting FSR4, which is the newest tech. So if you've heard of like DLSS or of course I'm gonna forget what XeSS is, Intel's version of this. All of these big tech companies have this software or this hardware. It can be both or either. That basically can take like a 720p resolution gameplay at 30 FPS, and using AI can basically blow it up to 4K and can make it run at 60 FPS. And what it does is, for the resolution, it just scales it up, but it uses AI to clean up all the edges and to make it, because if you took a 720p image and squeezed it out to, or stretched it out to 4K, it would look awful. All the pixels would be as big as my gigantic head, right? But when you use this tech, it uses AI to analyze the image and smooth everything out and make it look good. And it works really well, especially DLSS. the frame rate side of things, what it does is, say you're playing a game at 30 FPS, it takes, you know, your GPU, your graphics card, puts out an image, and it does that 30 times a second. That's how you get 30 FPS, right? Well, what this DLSS or FSR or these other things do is they take the frame and it reads it, and then it guesses, it does an approximation of what the next frame would look like before the actual next frame. And by putting in those guesses in between every frame, you get 60 FPS. And when it's, you know, one real frame for one generated frame, it works pretty well. I've had great success with it. I'll be talking about Cyberpunk 2077 later on in the show. But I finally went in there, and because that game is such a good showcase for NVIDIA, really. And I've, you know, been playing with all the tech because I have a decent rig, and it works really well, especially at this point. It was a little hairy at first, but it's gotten pretty good. Now, as a side tangent, the newest NVIDIA cards that use the newest version of DLSS are actually doing one real frame and then 3 generated frames and then one real frame. So you could take a 30 FPS image and get it up to 120 FPS. And it seems like it works pretty well. It's definitely, you know, the one-to-one is the best because it's the least amount of guessing. When you're now guessing 3 frames ahead, you're running into a situation where it's having to do some pretty creative work to figure out that next frame, but it does work, and it works pretty well. Coming back to FSR4, it's currently only available on the 9000 series GPUs that AMD just released. So the big players in hardware for graphics cards and things like that in PC is AMD is like the middle guy. NVIDIA is like the top dog by a mile. And then actually Intel, who makes Intel processors, is also has GPUs. They're pretty far behind in every way, but their most recent GPUs are actually really, really good, especially for their really cheap price. There's no way getting around it. It's cheap, and they're a really good value. They just aren't the most powerful yet. All these companies have their own versions of this tech that uplifts, right? And what happened last year when the PS5 Pro got announced, they announced PSSR, and that was PlayStation, supposedly their own version, you know, their own tech. Now, to me, this seemed kind of weird from the start. I have to be totally honest. I'm obviously an Xbox fan, but I respect what PlayStation does a lot. I also, you know, think that PlayStation does a lot of gimmicky things, and it's starting to look like maybe this was one of those things. So what got announced was that the PS5 Pro, which came out last year, the next evolution of PSSR is FSR4, AMD's tech. Well, what that leads me to believe, and they didn't come out and just say it themselves, I would assume that means that FSR or PSSR, the PlayStation tech, is just FSR. And if they're upgrading it to the newest version of FSR, that to me kind of confirms that. Like it's, just seems like it's clear. Now, what's interesting about it is that the PS5 Pro doesn't have RNDA. RNDA, that's what it is. RDNA, I believe, whatever it is. AMD's most recent tech, it's the 4th generation of it on these new cards that does FSR4, and you have to have it for that. The PS5 Pro actually has like the 3.5 version, but it has enough of the tools and enough of the hardware that it can run, like I had said, FSR4 to some capacity. My guess is that when they backport it, not everything is going to work perfectly as it does on the newest GPUs, but that it's probably going to offer an improvement, because it's very likely that PSSR, their proprietary solution, was probably just FSR3 or some version of it that would work on their own hardware. So, and that's fine. No harm, no foul. They Xbox and PlayStation use the same AMD tech, essentially. It's just, to me, this was very much, it's just kind of funny that it seems pretty obvious now that PSSR wasn't an in-house developed tech. It was just a version of an existing thing that Xbox can use as well. Now, what's unique is that FSR4 can't be used by any Xbox, as well as the base PS5 and the PS5 Slim can't use this, can't do this back is backporting either, because they don't have the right tech. The technology in the PS5 Pro is 2 or 3 generations beyond what the base consoles have, which is pretty cool. And that's why, at least at some point, people were pretty excited about it. That hasn't completely played out, but it's not bad still. So really interesting to see how this plays out. I think the thing I'm most interested in the future is what they're going to do with the PS6, the PlayStation 6, because it seemed like PSSR was going to be their solution, and they were using the PS5 Pro to essentially beta test it. And it definitely was. If you saw Digital Foundry talk about it, it does some things pretty well, and it doesn't do other things very great. Even though it seemed like a lot of the limitations were very similar to FSR3. Go figure. I suspect, logically, they would just drop the PSSR thing. If they're just moving on from that to FSR4, by the time the PS6 comes out, it's probably going to be FSR5. They've already said they're using AMD technology for their next console, so that's what they'll be using. My curiosity is, especially if Xbox stays with AMD as well, then they'll be using the same tech. They'll have FSR4 in their next hardware. And Sony is so desperate to at least say they have unique and different things. I could very well see them just kind of like what it seems like they did with PSSR, basically slightly modify FSR4 or 5, whatever they're on, and be like, yeah, this is PSSR2. Like, please ignore that it performs basically exactly the same as tech on PCs and Xbox and everything else. Just don't pay attention to that. We have a different name, so it's better. So we'll see. I'm very curious. We got an announcement this week that Xbox has over 1,000 games now on Play Anywhere. This was a pretty big conversation around the whole this is an Xbox campaign, because Xbox is, and we can all see it, pushing really hard that you don't need to buy a console anymore. If you want to play, the games that they put on PlayStation, you want to play them there, fine, go nuts. That's that's an Xbox now. You want to play on a streaming device, cool, go nuts. That's an Xbox now. You want to play through your TV that has, an app on it, awesome. That's an Xbox, blah, 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 right? Now, a big pushback on that was that a lot of Xbox games, like I was talking about with the handheld, can only play on the Xbox console or on PC, but they don't necessarily all have the porting, or they haven't all been enabled to, especially with Play Anywhere. The whole idea of it is you buy the game on the Xbox platform, and you can play it on anything. So in theory, if it's enabled for streaming, you can stream it. If it's enabled for cloud play, you can cloud play it. You can play it on PC, and you can play it on Xbox, and it all cloud saves as well. So in theory, like with Starfield, the way it works for me, I could stream my Xbox down to my TV downstairs and play Starfield, progress to something, save it, turn off my Xbox through the stream, then come up to my PC, start up Starfield through the app on PC. My save would be there, everything would be there. And then I could go to a vacation and get on the cloud and play Starfield through the cloud of the save that I've saved on both my PC and my Xbox, and my Xbox through streaming. Like, that's Play Anywhere, and it's super, super cool. But the big problem is that at first, and for a long time, it's been extremely limited to the games that can do it. Now there's over 1,000. That's a big deal. And it includes some games that are coming up soon. So the bigger they make that, the more legitimate their whole claim of, like, this is an Xbox and we don't care where you play, just play it somewhere. It more legitimizes that idea, and seems like where they're going. I'm a big defender of their current strategy. I don't know if it's going to work. It may crash and burn, and they may have to reverse course, or it may be detrimental to the future of the company. But I do appreciate that they're just trying to do something different, because they can't just keep basically pulling on Sony's coattails. It's not sustainable. Analysts are predicting the Switch 2 will be $400, and even though it's going to be more expensive than the original Switch, it's pretty much assumed that it's going to set records for revenue and units sold for a new gaming console. I mean, yeah, like, I'm probably going to buy one. I haven't owned a Nintendo piece of hardware since the Game Boy Color. I had one of the translucent purple ones, and it was super cool. and I haven't owned a console since. I didn't have a Wii. I don't have a Switch. I should have had a GameCube, but I didn't have one of those. So I'm excited for it because I'm going to get it basically no matter what. I'm still kind of curious to how it's going to play out in the long run. I think that Nintendo fans are going to be perfectly happy. They're probably going to sell 70, 80 million of them at least. But I think for them to have equal success to what they've had now, it really does need to be substantially better. And some of the stuff we've seen suggests that it may not be. It does look like the GPU and CPU, it's called an SoC because it's combined. It looks like it's going to cost about 30 or 40 bucks more than the Switch one did. So they will probably have to raise the price at least a little bit. And then you think about tariffs and inflation and all the stuff that's been going on. $400 seems almost a guarantee to me. It's I believe the Switch is 300. So that's fine. I'm going to get one either way. I'm curious to how quickly they'll start making games only for the Switch 2. My guess is that they are going to drag their feet on that, and we're going to see games get held back due to that, especially Switch exclusive games, because they are going to want to continue feeding that 130 or whatever million unit customer base that's on the Switch. They're not going to want to just give them up. They obviously will want them to upgrade and buy a Switch 2, and at some point I'm sure they'll basically force them to. But don't think for a second that they aren't going to keep making games for the original Switch as long as they possibly can, even if it's to the detriment of the quality of the games on the Switch too. I remember, and I looked it up fairly recently, but I can't remember the exact date. The PlayStation 2 was insanely popular. It's the highest selling console ever. When I worked at GameStop in college, and this was over 10 years ago, the PlayStation 2 hadn't been the new console in many years at that point, even. And it was still probably the thing that we sold the most of. And some publishers were still making new games for the PlayStation 2 when I was at GameStop. And it was weird because we would get shipments from GameStop of used games, right? Of games that were selling really well at our store. So we would get like from the GameStop warehouse. But we would also get, the new versions of games directly from the publishers, right? And every now and then we would get a box from Sony or whoever their distributor was, and it would be new copies of like FIFA or whatever for the PlayStation 2 that were like sealed and good to go. Like they were brand new printed copies. Even though they hadn't, I'm under the impression, and if you're watching the YouTube video, if you look this up, please let me know when the last year they did this was. They would basically do the most minimal updates on it's like FIFA like 2002 or something. And they basically just did minimal updates to that every year. And I swear that they made FIFA for the PS2 until like 2010. I'll have to look it up. I'll try to remember to put it in the comments or something on the YouTube video, but it was something insane that they kept making new games for the PlayStation 2 forever. And it's because so many PS2s were out there. I expect to see that with the Switch as well. So I'm really curious to what the sales of the Switch 2 are going to look like. I both think that it's true that it's going to set records for revenue and units sold. I also think that it may, in the long run, trail behind the Switch pretty significantly, but I could be wrong. That's just my prediction. SAG-AFTRA claims that negotiations with major game publishers and studios is no longer moving forward due to a lack of agreement on AI protections. I mean, this is obviously where things are going, and it sucks because I'm on the side of the voice actors because their performances, I'm sorry, I still haven't yet to see AI that can truly recreate that stuff. And even if they can, I don't want it because it'll still be missing that human element. The problem is that in Activision, a PlayStation, and Xbox, all these companies, I'm sure that there's creatives at those companies who agree, but the money people can see that they can license someone's voice and then use it through AI indefinitely for even if they have to pay that person more than they would make for multiple games. If they can then go use that voice in 100 games, it's going to save money in the long run. And that's obviously what they want to do. And I think that sucks because I'm sure the AI tech will get better. I'm sure it'll improve. It'll probably even get to the point eventually that you won't technically be able to tell. But I really do believe that it's going to struggle to ever truly recreate the emotion that a real person can create. And even if it can do that, I don't really care. I want people to get paid. Like, I want people to have jobs and to do this stuff, and to be able to do it for a living and not get pushed out of the industry because of some penny pinching. So this sucks. I assume I believe this includes EA and Activision, and I don't know if Xbox as a whole is part of this, or if it's just individual studios or some of their like sub publishers or whatever. Same with PlayStation, Nintendo. I'm not sure, but hopefully they can get themselves some guarantees there, and we'll all hope for the best. In that vein, a PlayStation demo using AI to create characters that you can interact with directly has leaked, and it shows someone talking to the Horizon protagonist, Aloy. So I'm under the impression this was using GPT, whatever the newest version is. It definitely wasn't, at least as far as I could tell, trying to recreate the actual voice actor's voice. It was a much more generic version of just a generic voice in general. And it was friggin' terrible. My favorite part, it goes like, "Hey Aloy," the human, the person talking goes, "Hey Aloy, how have you been doing lately?" And instead of like kind of what you would expect from this tech, where it would just be like, "Oh, I've been really great, just out here adventuring these lands. What about you?" Because that's what they want this stuff to do. It was like, "I've been dealing with a sore throat lately." Like, that line made me think like, "Oh, this is totally scripted. Like, there's no way this was a completely thing." Because like, why? Like, I don't know. Maybe it just sucks. Either way, it was freaking awful. And like I said, I'm sure this stuff is going to get better. I'm sure it's going to improve. I think there is utility with this. Where like, I don't want the protagonist being voiced like this, but if you want to do a thing where you're in Grand Theft Auto, and any random NPC you walk by can have a more in-depth conversation, or have more contextual or reactive things to say about you or about what's going on, or whatever, that could be cool, and it could be more realistic to do those things if it's being generated individually. But I have no desire to be talking to a video game character. I have no desire to be doing this, especially with the protagonist. I'm worried. I think this is concerning, and I don't think it's going to end well. The Division 1 has celebrated its 9th anniversary. I think Division 2 is either already has or will as well. It's, I think, 6th anniversary. It's pretty crazy. It's wild that those two games, Division 1 and 2, came out in hindsight so close together. And then now it's been, twice as much time since then. And the Division 3 is nowhere near coming. But it's cool. Like, Division 1 was the game that got me into streaming, making videos about video games, doing this podcast. This podcast used to be called the Echo Cast, and that was in reference to a feature in the Division. The Division 1, it's funny because it's one of those games that in hindsight, it released, it was really interesting. And I remember the beta was freaking awesome. I was so into it. And then it came out, and it was a little rough. It was pretty rough around the edges. They fixed it up pretty quickly, and by the end of its run of development, that they worked on it and released new things for a couple years. And it was cool. It's still to this day one of my greatest gaming experiences. Partially because of how I got so into taking screenshots back then. It doesn't even have a photo mode, but I got creative with that. I got really into so much, especially the lore and the story and the characters. I don't really like looter games. I don't like Destiny. I didn't like Outriders, and I don't like Warframe. But I still like the Division despite it being a looter, basically. I kind of learned to love it because I enjoy the actual gameplay and story and all of that. Division 2 has been a similar story for me. I haven't played it nearly as much. I think I'm around 700 or 800 hours, and Division 2, I'm in the multi-thousand hour mark for Division 1. I wouldn't dare guess at this point, but I spent a lot of time in that game. Just really, really cool. I've been pretty critical of the support for Division 2. Actually, that there's been too much. They did some content in between when Division 2 released, and then they had a DLC come out about a year later. And the support in between was pretty underwhelming, at least in my opinion. I'm under the impression a lot of the DLC they had, like the Pentagon missions and Kinley College and stuff, I'm under the impression that those were supposed to be much bigger experiences, but due to studios basically not being able to handle the original idea, they pared them down to what they currently are, which is, in my opinion, pretty underwhelming. And then Warlords of New York was cool because it took us back to New York City, where the main Division 2 game took place in DC. And it's cool. It also doesn't like fit into the story of Division 2 at all. It really, to me, has always seemed like a game that was the Warlords of New York DLC for Division 2, in my opinion, was absolutely supposed to be DLC for the first game. It makes way more sense that way, but for whatever reason, that's not how it worked out. So they kind of shoehorned it into Division 2, and then everything since then has been kind of rough. They what they've done since then, or they do these seasonal events, and they used to do these manhunts. So every season would be highlighted by this manhunt where you had to take out there was a big bad boss you had to chase down, and over the months you would take out their lieutenants, and then you would have a big final boss fight against the big bad. That devolved, in my opinion, to some pretty stupid storytelling. I really hate where the story of Division 2 has gone. So, well, I'll be curious to what happens in the long run. I've talked to some of the people associated with that brand about what's going on, and I'm under the impression I'm not the only one who feels like that about the story of Division 2 and where it's gone. But I also have a ton of respect for the team supporting it, because it's like a indie sized team that's trying to support this big AAA game and has been doing it for 6+ years. So I have a ton of respect for what they're doing. I just kind of wish they would have scaled back and just let the game be what it was while they made Division 3, which we know is currently in production of some type. My guess is it's still in pre-production. I believe they still have one or more director jobs open on their website. I can't imagine they're in full production yet if they don't even have their various directors on the project set in stone. My guess is that game is still a good 2 or 3 years away at best, not to mention all of Ubisoft's problems, right? So I'm really excited for Division 3. There is another small DLC coming for Division 2. I'm just curious to how worth it that's going to feel, but I still am excited for that. And I'm super proud of that whole team. And it's just it's a franchise that I just really love, even if I'm a little grumpy about it sometimes. And then speaking of Ubisoft's problems, they are reportedly in talks with Tencent and some other potential buyers to allow an investment in a unit in their company that controls a portion of their IPs, like Assassin's Creed, while allowing the Guillemot family, who founded the studio, to retain control of the company. I'm just so sick, man. I'm so sick of these people who own Ubisoft. It's so frustrating because Ubisoft catches a lot of crap and it deserves most of it, right? As a publisher. But the individual studios are really talented and have a lot of really great developers in it. I would argue that Ubisoft Massive is one of the best studios in the world. And I've gotten to see firsthand and through direct account how the ineptitude of that publisher has held back, especially that studio, but I'm sure all of their studios to a point, significantly. It's been bad. It's been awful, actually. It's almost embarrassing to hear some of the stories I've heard about how, things that they've tried to do and stuff like that, and how they just fumble over themselves and just kind of, it's strange. I'm sure at one point this family and Eves, who's the current CEO, were equipped and able to do this when it was a smaller operation, when it was a different era, right? But they just seem so out of touch and so incapable of steering this publisher in a modern gaming sphere, and they're suffering for it. It's a bloated publisher. They have way too many studios spread out way too many places. They don't put out hardly any games at all. The games they put out often do okay, but and their Assassin's Creeds and stuff always do pretty well and rate well and stuff like that. But they're not doing much that's original. They're really they lean so far into trying to do live service, or they try to just trend chase things from but then they were always 4 or 5 years late on those trends. And they just Ubisoft might be one of the best examples of a publisher that kind of just needs to get back to their roots and then maybe expand again from there. So they get back to making good, interesting, fun Far Cry games, bring back Splinter Cell, bring back, Ghost Recon, like real Ghost Recon games, not the crap that they've put out with the last two. I think that Ubisoft has a path back, but they definitely aren't taking the steps they probably need to. And I pretty much squarely blame that on the ownership and this move that they're trying to do by like basically creating like an investment opportunity for these outside companies without actually giving up power. I mean, I don't want them to sell necessarily, but I also can tell that like they had like the Vivendi fight a few years ago where they got bailed out by Tencent, oddly enough, and got to keep ownership of the company. I mean, that was a cool story, but then they've done basically nothing with it since. So we'll see. In a related story, a shareholder accuses Ubisoft of exploring acquisition deals with EA and Microsoft for potential sale of the company without consulting the shareholders. This, I don't think you have to do that from what I can tell and from the reporting I saw on this. But basically the person, it just sounds like a shareholder that's mad. Keep in mind, while this may be someone who has a significant amount of money into Ubisoft, I'm under the impression this could just be someone with one stock, which their stock isn't exactly expensive right now. You could buy quite a few of them, even for just like $100. You could get a decent amount. I think their stock's under $10 a share. So this is probably a no story. I do think Ubisoft, or at least a lot of its studios and its assets, its IP, would probably be better off under, even as much as people hate EA. I'd probably trust it more there, or a Microsoft, or even a PlayStation. Probably not Nintendo. I still want to see AAA games that aren't just like 720p, 25 FPS. But yeah, we'll have to see what happens with that. The Lego company is starting an in-house studio to make their own games. I believe TT Games is their big outside game developer who makes a lot of their crossover games and all of that. So this is interesting. It's hard to make games, man. We've seen Amazon try to do it. We've seen the biggest, richest companies in the world try to do this. Netflix, other ones, and they failed. So I'm curious. This is kind of a niche. They might be able to kind of play off of that to make this work. But I would be very cautious if I was Lego here. And not to mention, I'm currently playing through the Lego Marvel games with my daughter. We beat the first one. We're on the second, and there's a third one that's out there. And they may be the single worst games I've ever played in my entire life. She loves it. She has so much fun. We can play co-op. I like playing with her. But I've never played games that like there's a lack of like signposting and stuff in games, sometimes for the challenge or the adventure or whatever. These Lego games, especially because they're in theory made for children, are so abysmal at showing you or telling you what you're supposed to be doing at any given moment that literally, like, she doesn't care. She's just blowing stuff up and punching bad guys and all that, which is great. But then for me, who's trying to actually progress the game with her, it's just a nightmare. Because if there is a hint, it might show up for half a second and then it's just gone. You'll never know what you're supposed to do. And then you proceed to run around trying to find what thing you need to interact with, or what box you need to punch so that you can build a tool to move on or whatever. I hate those games so much, but I will end up playing all of them because my daughter likes it and I like playing with her, and she's like growing that love for video games, which is really exciting for me. The PlayStation logo has appeared on the official Bethesda Starfield mod website, suggesting it may come to the platform soon. This has been a long time coming. Starfield's been out for a year and a half at this point, if not more. Yeah, this is great. I'm super excited for this. A lot of the hate on Starfield, in my opinion, was the whole console war thing, and this was one of the first big releases that was previously multi-platform, and then that, after acquisition became the first big Xbox only release. Starfield's great. It's so good. If you like Bethesda games, you'll like Starfield. If you like Fallout 4, if you like, those type of games, yeah, they need to modernize their approach. Their engine is definitely dated, even though it does some things super, super well. And at least when it's sitting still, when models are sitting still and not being animated, it's beautiful. Like, it does look, and the lighting and stuff is excellent. Starfield, it's a really good game. I will never go away from that opinion. It's one of my favorite games of all time. Now, I do wish that it had some of the more modern amenities that we get from some other games, but there's also things in that game that I don't get from those games. So I'm really excited for Starfield to come to PlayStation. It's sold all the Xboxes it's ever going to sell. That's my big argument with the multi-platform thing. I don't really love day one multi-platform, like the new Doom game that's coming out. I kind of hate that. But what they're doing with Indiana Jones and stuff like that, do it 6 months, a year later, throw it over on PlayStation, whatever. It's not selling more Xboxes at that point. Cool. Now, and why I'm mostly excited about this is that it gives more motivation to modders to continue modding Starfield, because they're going to have the biggest an even bigger audience than Xboxes. Now will have access to the game, a bunch of new players flooding in to try it out. And then for me, it's, I still think a lot of the people who hated on this game, it was just because it wasn't on their thing. And so now it will be on their thing, and they'll all get to be like, oh, look, it runs better on the PS5 Pro than the Series X. And Series X people will be like, okay, like, yeah, I hope so. It's that console's twice as expensive. Anyways, I love this. I think it's great. I think Starfield especially. It's as someone who loves that game and wants to see more DLC and wants to see more support for that game, I'd love to see a Starfield 2 one day, genuinely. I'm excited for this. All the console warriors be damned. I think this is a good thing in the long run. I would expect an announcement for that. I was thinking maybe they would announce it alongside the new DLC at the summer showcase this year. If they're already making some of those moves, I would guess that announcement's coming sooner for the PlayStation. Maybe a tease of a DLC, but I don't expect them to reveal a DLC for Starfield until the summer. So we'll have to wait and see. BlizzCon is returning. They made the announcement. Blizzard did, now under Microsoft, that in September of 2026, not this year, but next, they will be bringing back BlizzCon. We got rumors this week that an Elder Scrolls Oblivion UE5, Unreal Engine 5 remake could be announced like super, super soon as well. So that kind of rounds out the PlayStation and adjacent studios news. And then the last thing, Warhammer 40K Space Marines is getting a third game, and it's in development right now. That's super cool. I never even finished Space Marine 2, and it was still one of my favorite games last year. It has a lot of that old school kind of 360 PS3 kind of feel to it, but very modernized. Still, it's gorgeous. It's a very pretty game, but it just felt good to play. The characters were interesting. The story was interesting. Everything that was going on. I just need to finish it. I just stopped playing, not because I didn't like it. I can't remember what I got distracted by. It was probably like Baldur's Gate 3 or something. It probably might not have even been a new game, but we'll have to wait and see. So super excited for that. I think that's Saber maybe who makes that. But yeah, that's good. It's a good thing. Moving on to some content updates. We hit 3,000 subscribers on my YouTube recently. If you're not subscribed, please go over there as we push to 4,000. I've had that channel for like 7 years, right? I only really started trying to kind of push it about 2 years ago. I believe it was 2023 was when I started to make a real push on it. So to make, I think I've more than doubled in size since then. Look, it's nothing. 3,000 subs is nothing in this game. In this, there's people who started channels a month ago who have gotten more than that already. That's fine. I understand I may not be exactly the appealing meta right now when it comes to gaming content creation. But what I will say is that I have really stuck to my principles of not being clickbaity, not going on in any grifts and things like that. I make podcasts and videos and other things that I genuinely enjoy making or talking about. It's why, most of my videos, I talk about a possible fifth Mass Effect game that is maybe 4 or 5 years away. I wouldn't do that if I was trying to get 100,000 subs and stuff like that. There's other things I could do to at least be more successful than I am, but I wouldn't be happy. I do this for fun, this podcast, those videos. I have a full-time job. I have a family. I have other things I do, believe it or not. I do this when I can. It's like a serious hobby, right? So that's why I do, people join as members and Twitch subs and support in other ways. That money goes places. I think if you look at my videos from years ago, I've significantly updated my setup. I've tried to do a better job with, the camera and lighting and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, this is still just for fun, and hitting 3,000 subs for me is awesome. I'm really proud of it. And I really appreciate anyone who is listening or watching this and my other content. People's attention and their time is maybe the most valuable thing that we own, or that we have. And when people give that to me, I take it very seriously, and I really appreciate that. So 3,000 subs, let's hit 30,000 before I retire. I am currently playing Cyberpunk 2077. I had never done the Phantom Liberty DLC. I'd also never really taken the time to dial in all the settings on that for my pretty decent computer. I have a 7700X CPU, a 4070 Ti GPU, and 64 gigs of RAM. So I've never really messed with DLSS and ray tracing and all of that, and it works really well. It's super cool. It's awesome. It's really cool to look at. I've got lots of other opinions about the game, some good and some bad. In general, I think this will be the third time I've beat it once I finish this playthrough, even though I've started it up probably a dozen times. I'm gonna make a video about it, so look out for that on my YouTube in the next couple weeks, where I'll kind of give my updated thoughts on the game and kind of what I'm feeling about like Witcher 4 and the next Cyberpunk that's currently in development in Boston with their new studio. It's been interesting, so we'll talk about it. And I am getting a Assassin's Creed Shadows review code on the 18th. So I guess it's more of like a creator early code, 1 day early. But we will be able to, as soon as we get the code, make videos, stream, do all that. So I do plan on jumping onto a stream on the 18th to be able to play and show it off a little bit, and we can kind of check it out together for the first time. I'm excited about that game. I think Shadows looks great. I couldn't get into Valhalla. I liked Odyssey a ton. Same with Origins. I loved, and I obviously like the old ones as well. But I'm excited for this game. All the controversy around it is so stupid. Like, I don't care. It's also pointless. I think it looks like a lot of fun, and especially the recent footage they've been putting out of the combat looks like a blast. Like the dismemberment and the gore and all that. Like, it looks like it's gonna be fun to play. So be on the lookout for that. And that is where I am going to wrap this episode up. If you have any questions or feedback, be sure to let me know in the Spotify or YouTube comments. Let me know in my Discord, or hit me up on social media at BonDiesel or at the Baunfire on basically everything. Thank you so much for listening to this whole show, and please consider supporting via the links in the show description. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. So, until next time.